30 minutes isn't a lot of time to present an alternative to capitalism, so I'm going to move along. Neoliberalism, what is it? Well, think of trade, exchange. It could be material exchange, could be cultural exchange, could be intellectual exchange. When exchange happens, there are benefits. The benefits could accrue in various ways. They could accrue more to the wealthy and the more powerful, or more to the poor and the weak. Typically, they accrue more to the wealthy and more powerful. Neoliberalism isn't all that new and different. It's basically a name for trying to tilt the playing field even further. Generally, it's by letting markets do their thing without regulations that hinder the tilt of the playing field and reduce the gap between the rich and the powerful and the poorer and the weaker. But when people say, what do you want, to people who are in the anti-corporate globalization movement, the first possible answer is to say something like, we want internationalism, we want to go the other way. We want to diminish the gap. We want to tilt the playing field the other way. So instead of the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, we want new institutions that would instead protect workers' rights, would protect the environment, would protect the local industries, would notice the relative disparity in power and wealth, and opt to protect the weak and to move the playing field. That's all well and good, but it doesn't actually answer the question. And the reason it doesn't answer the question is because the person asking, what do you want, tends to mean instead, often, what's going to be different at the heart of things that won't corrupt the changes that you make. So for instance, suppose we build a movement, an anti-corporate globalization movement that's big enough and strong enough to make those changes. The person's asking, if we keep the same type of economy in the United States and in Britain and in Germany and so on and so forth, as we had before, slowly but surely, the playing field's going to go right back to the way it was before. Because those capitalist economies put tremendous pressure on the international domain and on the domestic domain to benefit the elites, the people who own and who have dominant power and wealth. So the question really becomes, what's your alternative to capitalism? The question is basically Margaret Thatcher's Tina. There either is no alternative or there is, and what people are talking about is the underlying relationships. So I want to talk about that. And then maybe one or two of the implications of that. If we want to think about an alternative economic vision, an alternative to capitalism, we have to have some sort of approach to this problem. And one kind of approach to this problem is to figure out what our values are, what it is that we want an economy to do. And then once we have those values, to figure out what institutions can implement them, can accomplish them. So obviously one thing we want an economy to do is produce stuff that we like. So that's sort of a given, that's what an economy is about. We want, an economy affects relations among people, right? That's something that happens along with producing stuff. It affects the relations among people. It can create a rat race. It can create an environment in which nice guys finish last, in which you have to be callous toward others to get ahead, a market environment. Or it can create an environment, we could imagine, if we stretch ourselves, it could create an environment in which people have shared interest, in which people have empathy, in which solidarity is enhanced. So the first value I want to propose is solidarity, and I want to say that an economy is better if it produces more solidarity instead of producing anti-sociality. It's one value. Not very controversial. There are very few people around who would say an economy is better, all other things equal, if it makes people go at each other like that instead of feeling solidarity. So it's not controversial. The second thing that economy affects is the range of options that exist for people. The value here, typical left value here, the word that you'd use would be diversity. We want an economy which creates a wider range of options, which doesn't put all its eggs in one basket, which diversifies outcomes and possibilities instead of homogenizing them. Again, it's not very controversial, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it's another value that I favor. An economy affects the distribution of income. An economy produces a social product, total product. Think of it as a pie. How big a slice do you get, right? How big a slice do you get? What's your income? What share of the social product do we get? There are a number of norms that can be applied to answer that question. Economists have a few. First norm is, if I have a piece of paper in my pocket, a deed to property, then I get the profits that are accrued and that generate from the use of that property. So if I'm Bill Gates and I have a piece of paper in my pocket that gives me a deed to the lot of Microsoft, I make more income than the entire population of Norway. I'm going to assume that among this group, that is not considered to be a moral condition or an economically fine condition, but rather a barbaric condition. A condition kings probably would have dreamed of having access to, his kind of wealth. So I'm going to dispense with that one without a lot of trouble, a lot of time, because we don't have that much time. The second value for what's called remuneration, income distribution, is, you know, Al Capone was famous American gangster, thug, killer, murderer, you know, sort of like Bush and Cheney. Except he did it individually instead of a state, so he was a criminal. He used to say, and I'm not making this up, capitalism is the best of all possible systems. Because in capitalism, you get what you can take. That's remunerating power. It's remunerating bargaining power. He really should have said in a market economy, you get what you can take, because it isn't just capitalism. But in any case, it's remunerating bargaining power. It's a thug's economy. Al Capone likes it. The graduates of all the finest business schools in the world like it. But I'm going to assume we don't like it. That we don't want an economy which is basically built on power, right? What you're able to take because of your bargaining power, you get. So we'll dispense with that one. The third option for a remunerative norm is one that actually many socialists, most market socialists, almost all market socialists like, but I don't like it. The norm is that you should get back from the economy what you contribute in the way of output by way of your labor. So if I work and I produce this much value, this much stuff which has this much value, I should get back this much value. I get back in diverse goods instead of just the one good that I was producing. But I should get back an equivalent to the value that I produced by my labors. After all, if I get more, I must be getting something that somebody else did. If I get less, somebody else is getting something that I did. So it sounds fair, right? On the face of it, it sounds fair, which is why a lot of people are for it, a lot of people who care about justice and equity and so on. I don't like it for a number of reasons. Here's one reason I don't like it. The two of you are going to cut sugar cane. It's an old Cuban example. Two of you are going to cut sugar cane. You're 6'4", 240 pounds, and as strong as a bull. You're 5'8", 130 pounds. You're healthy, but you're not as strong. You go out into the fields. Same length of time, same hot sun, same conditions. You cut this much, you cut this much. Whoops, backwards. You cut this much, you cut this much. Should we remunerate you in that order? In other words, should we give you more because you were born with a genetic endowment that you gave you some qualities that enable you to produce a lot? Strength, in this case. Or we can imagine other cases. You all know Michael Jordan, the basketball player in the United States. So he's playing for the Bulls here. Let's make it Beckham. You all know who David Beckham is. So he's playing for whatever the whole team is, and I don't know. And he's earning, let's say, $20 million a year playing football. How many of you think that he's overpaid? Raise your hand. If we're using, a good norm that we want to have for a new society, how many of you think he's underpaid? None of you are market socialists. A market socialist, to be consistent, would have to say he's underpaid. Because if we remunerate output, you might not like this, but the fact is that the public likes his product, playing soccer, football, so a tremendous amount. So much that the value of it is gargantuan, way more than $20 million a year, or whatever the number of pounds is, right? Way more than that. Who else gets it? The owner of the Chicago Bulls, because he has a piece of paper in his pocket. The owner of Nike, because he has a piece of paper. What Beckham gets is what he can take, what his bargaining power lets him take. But it's less than the output, so we don't believe in remunerating output, it turns out. Our response is, no, we shouldn't do that. Let's go back to the sugarcane example. Suppose you have a better tool for cutting the sugarcane. You have a worse tool. You cut this much with your better tool, you cut this much with the worse tool. Should you earn less? This is a value. You might answer yes. In other words, your values, your ethics might be such that you answer yes. If you're stronger, you get more. If you have a better tool, you get more. I don't think so. I think the norm that makes sense, and this is going to be the third value, solidarity, diversity, equity, and the equity to me means that we should remunerate people for how long they work, for how hard they work and for the onerousness of their work. Right? So if you work under more onerous conditions, or you work longer, or you work harder, you get more. If you work under less onerous conditions, less hard, or less long, you get less. Now that is quite contrary to what we do. It's also quite contrary to what happens in market socialism and actually centrally planned socialism as well. But in any case, that's the norm that I would favor. And we could experiment with that and think about it and whether it works or not and whether it has the right incentive effects. If I offer you more to be able to play soccer like Beckham, can you change your genetic makeup so you can do it? No. There's no incentive effect to do that. Rewarding genetic endowment has zero incentive effect. You can't do it. Can you work longer to get more? Yes. Can you work harder? Yes. Can you work at more onerous conditions when it's necessary? Yes. It has the proper incentive effect.